All right. Very recently, I've been hearing a lot about the California reservoirs and how they've gone from almost being completely dry at the peak of the drought to just being actually overflowing in some cases. So I was hearing a lot about reservoirs and I figured I should know a little bit more about this. So I found this great article online and I was going to start reading it, but I figured might as well just read it live so we could all learn together. So this is by AP News. The link is in the description if you want to follow along. But let's just check this out. There's lots of different cool photos that show the changing reservoir levels. So dramatic photos show how storms filled California reservoirs. Water levels fell so low in key reservoirs during the depth of California's drought that boat docks sat on dry, cracked land and cars drove into the center of what should have been Folsom Lake. Those scenes are no more after a series of powerful storms dumped records amount of rain and snow across California, replenishing reservoirs and bringing an end mostly to the state's 3-year drought. So they say mostly an end to the drought because about 1 year ago, 94% of the state was in severe drought. Now that's down to 1%. And while we're thinking about it, just decline that. While we're thinking about it, we can actually look up the California drought real quick because there were some big updates yesterday. You can see almost the entire Bay Area and Central Coast is out of the drought. Much of the central parts of California are out of even the abnormally dry category, which is the yellow color over there. And then the one I've been following the most closely is the orange color, which is severe drought. And it's only this small little corner on the eastern side of California that's still in severe drought. This is a nice little data table that breaks it down. It shows that my favorite way to look at it is start of water year or 1 year ago. 94% of the state was in severe drought. Now it is actually less than 1%. So pretty amazing to see there. We do still have around 25% of the state in moderate drought. 44% of the state is considered abnormally dry. But now the majority of California isn't even in the abnormally dry category. And no parts of California are extreme drought or exceptional drought. Start of water year or 1 year ago, 40% of the state was in extreme drought. So yeah, we've seen some great improvements there. And the improvement this last week was we went from 2% of the state still being severe down to less than 1%, which is the best that it's been in a very long time. So let's check out the first picture here. This is houseboats rest in a channel at Lake Orville State Recreation Area in Butte County, California on August 14th, 2021. Wow. And then now let's see that's the before picture. Now let's see the after picture. So this is as of March 26, 2023. Quite a change right there. And then this article is just going to be filled with cool photos just like that. So now let's continue. It's a stunning turnaround of water availability in the nation's most populous state. Late last year, nearly all of California was in drought, including at extreme and exceptional levels. Wells ran dry, farmers fallowed fields, and cities restricted watering grass. I even saw some people were painting their grass green to make it look like it was still green out there. The water picture changed dramatically starting in December when the first of a dozen atmospheric rivers hit, causing widespread flooding and damaging homes and infrastructure, and dumping as many as 700 inches of snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So yeah, it has been quite a year in terms of snowfall for the Sierra. The southern Sierra, actually we could just look at this as well. So this is how the course of this video is going to go. We're going to read the article. It's going to remind me of things. We're going to explore different concepts. And right now, I want to show what I think is the coolest data showing the California snowpack. So right here, it shows in the northern Sierra, we picked up 200% of average, so twice as much snow as you would expect. Central Sierra is 242%, so 2.5 times as much snow. And the southern Sierra has picked up 3 times as much snow as normal. So pretty amazing year. A lot of sources are saying that this could be the snowiest year on record, and our records go back to 1950. Although it's always hard to compare snow data, and especially going that far back in time. But regardless, it's got to be in the top 3 snowiest years of all time. And then as that snow continues to melt over the next few months, it's going to lead to just more increases in our reservoir levels. So actually it could be interesting. California reservoirs. Just to see, I think I clicked on this graphic earlier and it was really good. Just to see where some of our reservoirs are at right now. That was the one we talked about on KSBW this morning. San Luis Reservoir is actually, so total capacity 99%, historical average looks like it's 116%. Just trying to figure out what these are showing. So blue bar is storage level for date. Gold bar is total reservoir capacity. Green line is historic level for date. And then it shows percent of capacity on the bottom left. So it looks like San Luis is at 99%, Shasta is at 86% capacity, Orville is 83%, Folsom 69%. I think Folsom was just some of those pictures that we were looking at. And then Diamond Valley, 62. So you can just easily get a picture of our reservoir levels by looking at the yellow bar is how much it could be holding, the blue bar is how much it is holding. And then based on how high the bar is, it tells you how much the reservoir holds. So for example, Cachuma looks like it doesn't hold that much water, whereas San Luis Reservoir looks like it holds a large amount. So the good news is that our reservoirs that hold the most water look like they're pretty close to full capacity. And there's a whole science behind reservoir levels and having to manage the water, because as we just heard in this article, we had 12 atmospheric rivers this year. And imagine if on the 6th atmospheric river, San Luis Reservoir, or the people who manage the water there were like, okay, yeah, let's fill it all the way up. And then you have 6 more reservoirs when it's already full, and then it leads to overflowing, some flooding. So they had to manage it throughout the season where they're trying to get it close to the top, but then in some cases they have to let some water out. And then you want to time it for the end of the rainfall season so you have as much as possible at the end of the season. Overall, it looks like they did a pretty good job of managing our water there. So great job to all the water managers out there. So just continuing, California, although one more thing I will say, because it talked about how there was some widespread flooding, damaging homes and infrastructure. That was a big problem with some of the atmospheric rivers that we had this last year. During an atmospheric river, it is a natural part of the California ecosystem, but you pick up a lot of water very quickly. I think there's a great graphic for this I've probably clicked this 100 times, so it should just pop up here. I don't really see it. Might be this one. Yep, of course it was the first link. So it's this graphic right here. And the fact that I always point out, and it stands out to me the most, is that on average, about 30 to 50% of annual precipitation on the West Coast occurs in just a few atmospheric river events and contributes to the water supply and flooding risk. So a few events leads to up to half of the entire rainfall amount that the West picks up. And then you think about the fact that we had 12 events this last year. It makes sense that we have a record snowpack, and then with an atmospheric river, you do pick up so much rain so quickly. And then if you have storm after storm, the soils become saturated, so then it can't absorb anymore, so then it leads to flooding. So rain and atmospheric rivers, they're good and bad, you could say. And we've certainly felt some of the bad. We had the levee break in Pajaro. People are still dealing with the impacts of that to this day. A lot of flooding up in the Santa Cruz Mountains and other parts of California. But on the bright side, we've seen some great improvements in the drought monitor. We have a lot more moisture in our fuels for this next wildfire season. There might be a beautiful California super bloom that we'll be able to enjoy over the next couple of months. And then, as we're seeing here, a lot of these pictures just look amazing compared to where we were and where we are now. So California went from the 3 driest years on record to the 3 wettest weeks on record when we were catapulted into our rainy season in January. says Carla Nemeth, Director of California Department of Water Resources. So hydrologically, California is no longer in a drought except for very small portions of the state. And I should look at when was the date that this came out. Came out yesterday. So we're looking at some very recent information here. And today is April 7th. Some people might be watching this live, but some people also might be watching this later. So just some pretty cool imagery right here. Not bad. So all the rain and snow, while drought busting, and that's what some people call atmospheric rivers, they call them drought busters, may bring new challenges. Some reservoirs, for whatever reason, that's a hard word for me to say, are so full that water is being released to make room for storm runoff and snowmelt that could cause flooding this spring and summer, a new problem for weary water managers and emergency responders. This is also something I've heard a lot of people talking about, is that because our reservoirs are so full and because we have a record snowpack, normally when that melts, it's a good thing. It goes into our rivers. We're able to produce electricity with it through our hydroelectric power plants. It goes into our reservoirs, and then we use that for our water supply, for irrigation. But if you have a record snowpack melting, while at the exact same time you have full reservoirs, that water's got to go somewhere, and it can lead to flooding. So water managers are definitely going to have their hands full, where I'm sure there's some kind of computer models that they can use to predict how much flow you're going to get off from that snowpack melting. But it also might have been hard to train those models because we're seeing a snowpack right now that we've only maybe seen 3 times in recorded history. So just continuing there, these storms have created one of the biggest snowpacks on record in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The snowpack's water content is 239% of its normal average and nearly triple in the southern Sierra, according to state data. I'd say you don't have to say nearly triple. It is triple. We just looked at the graphic. Now, as the weather warms up, water managers are preparing for all that snow to melt, unleashing a torrent of water that's expected to cause flooding in the Sierra foothills and Central Valley. And I've heard a few people talking about the Tulare Basin is one of the places that they're the most worried about. We know there will be flooding as a result of the snowmelt, Nemeth said. There's just too much snowmelt to be accommodated in our rivers and channels and keeping things between levees. So yeah, that's something we're definitely going to have to, I'd say, worry about over the next couple of months. But at the same time, we can't focus too much on the negative aspects of the snowpack and that it's going to lead to some flooding. It's also going to provide a lot of much needed water to California, and that's crucial for, I can think of 3 main areas where our water is crucial. It's important for the environment because, without water, fish species and birds and all the other animals that rely on our rivers and just moisture in our environment, it's a lot better for them. That's guaranteed. It's also good for agriculture. Earlier in this article, we were reading about during the peak of the drought, some farmers had to leave their fields fallow. That's not going to be the case this year. I did hear one story that the normal water allocation has been bumped way up for farmers in California because of all the water that we have to work with. So here's a nice photo from a car crosses Enterprise. Oh, and then the third aspect, I only named 2. I named environment, agriculture, and then the third one is urban. That makes up only 10%. So how it breaks down is 50% of our water goes to the environment, 40% to agriculture, and 10% is for urban. I think that's why I maybe forgot it. It's, even though it seems like the most important aspect to people, like your average person, because that's what we rely on to turn our showers on, to water our lawns, to play golf, it's actually the smallest percentage of California's water, which I thought was pretty interesting when I first learned that. So a car crosses Enterprise Bridge over Lake Orville's dry banks on May 23rd, 2021 in Orville, California. So you can see how dry it is right there, and now that's what it looks like as of March 26th, 2023. So Lake Orville looking good. And then, the reason I pause right here is I want to have this one up. So whenever we look at pictures, we can look at what the percent capacity is right now. So Lake Oroville is 83% capacity, and it's 115% above the historical average. So you see the green line there, we are above average. So good news on Lake Oroville. So now just continuing. Managers are now releasing water from the Oroville Dam spillway, which was rebuilt after it broke apart during heavy rains in February 2017 and forced the evacuation of more than 180,000 people downstream along the Feather River. Man, that whole area has had a tough decade in terms of not only all the wildfires we've seen up there, but with that big flood as well. That is something, maybe I'll do a video on that in the future because that's definitely something I should know more about. So the reservoir is 16% above its historical average. That's compared to 2021, when water levels dropped so low that its hydroelectric dams stopped generating power. Interesting. When the water levels... So this is still talking about Lake Oroville. And if you don't know, hydroelectricity makes up about 15% of, I believe it's our, I forget if it's California's hydropower in California. What percentage? I forget if it's 15 or 30. Yeah, so hydropower averages 15% of California's electricity generation, but then there's a spread on it. That's what I was trying to remember. From 7% in dry years to over 20% in wet years. So you can imagine in this picture, that's one of the dry years where they weren't even able to use or generate hydropower. And then this year, guaranteed we're going to be over that 20%. It's one of the rainiest years we've seen, and lots of snow to work with. As the snow melts over the next few months, that'll also be filling up our reservoirs that produce some of the hydropower that is just very cost-effective, clean, and renewable energy source. Again, an interesting fact I learned the other day is if you're thinking about the different forms of renewable energy and you're thinking about which one provides the most electricity, you might jump to wind or solar because you hear a lot about those, but hydropower across the world makes up 70% of our renewable energy, which is pretty surprising statistic, I would say. So that year, the Bidwell Canyon and Lime Saddle marinas had to pull most recreational boats out of Lake Oroville and shut down their boat rental business because water levels were too low and it was too hard to get to the marinas, said Jared Rael, who manages the marinas. So I think this is pictures of that. Boat docks sit on dry land at Browns Ravine Cove, area of drought-stricken Folsom Lake in Folsom, California on May 22nd, 2021. And then now over here, as of March 26th, we are looking terrific. So they just mentioned Folsom. Let's check it out. Looks like it's at 69% capacity. And perhaps the reason we see some of these ones on the eastern side of our map right here is because they're purposely leaving some room for the snowmelt. That's something I should maybe double check though. So Folsom, right around average for this time of the year. Actually 106%. So we're above average for this time of year. And it certainly looks good. In late March, the water at Lake Oroville rose to 859 feet above sea level, about 230 feet higher than its low point in 2021, according to state data. So compared to 2021, right? That's the comparison, yeah. It rose 230 feet. And that's just talking about height. So if you think about entire water volume, that is a massive difference. The public is going to benefit with the water being higher. Everything is easier to get to. They can just jump on the lake and have fun, Rael said. Right now we have tons of water. We have a high lake with a bunch of snowpack. We're going to have a great year. So that's pretty great news right there. The abundant precipitation has prompted Governor Gavin Newsom to lift some of the state's water restrictions and stop asking people to voluntarily reduce their water use by 15%. So that makes sense. You have water restrictions when it gets very dry. Some of those restrictions are lifted. Although with that, I should say, just because you have something doesn't mean you should waste it unnecessarily. Although, as we know, urban only makes up about 10% of California's water budget. So, yeah, we can start washing our cars again, I would say, and maybe taking a little longer showers. Although, I will say, nothing's better than a cold shower, and you usually don't want to stay in that very long. So Newsom has declared the drought over because there are still water shortages. Oh, see, I was surprised when I read that, but it was because I read it wrong. Newsom has not declared the drought over because there are still water shortages along the California-Oregon border and parts of Southern California that rely on the struggling Colorado River. So yeah, if you didn't know that, a lot of Southern California's water comes from the Colorado River, and that would flow from places that maybe haven't picked up and had as great of a year as California has in terms of rainfall. Actually just interested in seeing if any of the states east of us... Oh wait, let's not go drought. Let's just go drought in general. Current map, U.S. drought monitor. Oh, interesting. So it does look like some of the states east of us are still in some abnormally dry and moderate drought conditions. Colorado River, you can see, starts in Colorado over here, comes down to the California-Arizona border. And then looks like there's still some severe drought in parts of Nevada and Utah and eastern Colorado, but not nearly as bad as it used to be. And you can see where the Colorado River starts in Colorado. There isn't any drought. But then it goes through some moderate drought in Utah, comes into Arizona, and then along Southern California-Arizona border, that is where we haven't picked up as much rain as, for example, Central California. So, yeah, makes sense that the drought's not officially over because, yeah, there is still some moderate drought out there. So just continuing, a vehicle is parked on a newly revealed piece of land. How did the vehicle get there? Newly revealed piece of land due to receding waters at the drought-stricken Folsom Lake in Granite Bay, California on Saturday, May 22, 2021. Now let's see what it looks like. Pretty amazing. Not parking that vehicle there anymore. Hopefully they were able to drive across the water. That's kind of a funny photo. Cities and irrigation districts that provide water to farms will receive a big boost in water supplies from the State Water Project and Central Valley Project, networks of reservoirs and canals that supply water across California. So that's for cities and irrigation districts that provide water to farms. They're going to get a big boost in the water coming in because there's a lot more water to work with. Some farmers are using the stormwater to replenish underground aquifers that had become depleted after years of pumping and drought left wells dry. That's great news right there. I did a long live stream. I believe it was last Friday. It was like an hour and a half. It ended up being way longer than I intended. But one of the things I learned in that, I was diving into California water, and what I learned is that we pump 2 million more acre feet out of our groundwater every single year than is replenished. So that is actually huge that some farmers have the foresight to take the surplus of water we have right now and kind of put some of that in the savings account for later. Because on average, we pump our groundwater unsustainably, which means we wouldn't be able to do the same kind of practice and behaviors for a long period of time without running out of groundwater, which makes up 30% of our water in California. So good to hear that they are replenishing some of those underground aquifers. It's good for the future. It's just like saving. So state officials are warning residents not to let the current abundance let them revert to wasting water. That's what I was trying to say earlier. In the era of climate change, one extremely wet year could be followed by several dry years, returning the state to drought. So the part about climate change, it might be that I know there's some research papers that say there's bigger extremes where there's the dries are drier and then the wets are wetter. Certainly seems to be the case over the last decade. But I do also just know it's also a natural part of California's ecosystem to go back and forth between drought and rain. And it's also normal for California to get atmospheric rivers where you pick up a lot of water over a short period of time. So the mechanism has maybe always been there. It just might be heightened or have a larger magnitude or be a little bit more extreme because of the changing climate. So given weather whiplash, it's kind of an extreme way to say it, we know the return of dry conditions and the intensity of the dry conditions that are likely to return means we have to be using water more efficiently. Nemeth said, we have to be adopting conservation as a way of life. So, yeah, it's also one of those things, it's a multivariate problem. It's not just like it's drier, so then we're wasting or we need to save up. There's all kinds of things. There's also far more people living in California than ever before. There's also believe it or not, there's more trees than should actually be sustained by the natural environment if we were to allow fire to clear out some of the fuels in the landscape. And then with an abundance of fuels, it's not only bad for wildfire, but it also sucks up a lot of that water. And then that ends up most likely getting us into drought faster. But regardless, what these paragraphs are saying is don't waste water, and I certainly agree with that. So looking at this, dry hillsides surround Lake Oroville on May 22nd, 2021. And now let's see what it looks like from the same. Wow, that is a huge difference. That might be one of the biggest differences that we've seen so far. Very cool shot there. Maybe should have made that one the thumbnail. So this one, an empty boat dock sits on dry land on Browns River Cove near the drought-stricken Folsom Lake. And then that's what it looks like now. Wow, which reservoir is this one? So this is another Lake Oroville. Boat crosses Lake Oroville below trees scorched in the 2020 North Complex fire on May 23rd, 2021 in Oroville. So you can see, wow, that's quite a picture for California. It shows the drought, and then it also shows impacts from wildfire. And then you look at it now, absolutely beautiful. Here's a boat. People walk near the boat docks as they sit on dry land at Browns Ravine Cove. This is Folsom Lake again. That might be the same cove that we were looking at earlier from the more aerial shot. Not sure where this one is. This is houseboats float on Lake Oroville. Not much water to float on. And then I'm sure the comparison here is going to be amazing. Wow. All right, so one way. Oh, low battery. All right, I will be back in 20 seconds. I got to go grab my charger. All right, it's a good thing that the computer warns you when your battery is low, otherwise that live stream would have just been cut off. And I think we're learning some pretty interesting stuff, so I'm glad to keep going here. What I was going to say is, look at this pillar right here. That's a good little measure to show how much the water has risen. You think about how small a car would be on this bridge. And then think about how high that is right there. And then you compare that with what it looks like now. That is a huge increase in water. This looks like the same cove in Folsom Lake. Big difference there. And then this looks like another one where it shows the impacts of the drought and the impacts of the North Complex at the exact same time on Lake Oroville. Looks like that structure was lost in the fire. North Complex, I remember forecasting for that one. That was a pretty scary fire. And then that's what it looks like now. So just switching back and forth between those two. Haven't been able to, looks like they haven't rebuilt the structure, but got a nice motorhome there. Pretty sweet truck too. And I think that is it. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting article right there. Hopefully you learned something as well. And over the last 2 weeks, I've been very interested in California water, so I'm probably going to continue to do little live streams like this in the future. If you want to learn about California water, drought, reservoirs, wildfire, weather, all kinds of things, you can subscribe to this channel, and hopefully you learned something. I felt that I did, and thanks for watching.